Hello, I'm Sean Richards of Not Yes Men's Economics, and today what I'd like to talk about is the issue of public finances. Now, there's two particular reasons why this matters. One is just in general how much borrowing there's been, and of course, in this time, governments are borrowing a lot more. The next factor is if you look at things like tax receipts, they give us an idea of how an economy is actually doing. And in this during pandemic or hopefully post-pandemic period, this is a particular issue because a lot of the numbers that we use have let us down a bit. An example of this has come from the UK, which if we look at the detail here, we see first an enormous surge of borrowing. Over the last 3 months, somewhere around 128 billion. Now that, it depends exactly what forecast you're looking at, but it's somewhere around 4 times what we're expecting for the whole year. So that shows the changes that we've seen due to the pandemic. Governments, if we look around the world, have been spending more. Tax receipts have fallen. So on the actual borrowing figure, that's a double whammy. It always balloons at times like this for this reason. It's pulling on both sides. But if we look further into the detail of that, there's actually some better news. I would say good news, but it's hard to say when you've borrowed that much. What do I mean? Well, if we look at the numbers for May, we see that the tax receipt figures have been revised up and by quite a bit. We're discussing £10 billion here, which even in these inflated times is a lot of money. And we see that in particular, it's come from income taxes, that's most of it. And also a bit, somewhere around 2.3 billion, so a quarter roughly, from our expenditure tax, which we call VAT or consumption tax, if you like. So that suggests that our economy in May was doing better than previously reported. One of the basic measures of an economy and how it's doing is how much tax you can collect. I think people will understand that concept. So bringing that forwards now to June, which is the latest month that's been measured, we see that the borrowing has fallen from that level by a further 10 billion. Now, it's still true, as a counterpoint, that the UK borrowed 35.5 billion in 1 month, which, so I was pointing out, is maybe a year's borrowing we're expecting before. But in terms of May being revised down by 10 billion, and then a gain of a further 10 billion, we're seeing the beginnings of the economy picking up and maybe the government not having to spend so much. This picture, I think, is something that we may see around the world as we look around, as in, obviously, there'll be differences. For example, in the United States, we've seen some states have to reimpose pandemic measures. But in general, as economies open, we'll see things pick up. And hopefully, the message that things were not quite as bad in economic terms as we may have thought will be something that will come around the world because we all need that. There's another undercut to this, so my third point for today is, because of the impact of central banks, governments are finding it very cheap to borrow. Something extraordinary is happening in the UK, which is prone to inflation. Sometimes we're actually being paid to issue debt. This has happened at various places around the world, particularly the Euro area and Japan, I suppose one should add. But for the UK, it is something of note, because as I said, we are prone to inflation. So real yields, if you allow for inflation, are very negative. But as we look out, the UK, even on its longest borrowings, which is around about 50 years, pays a little only at 0.5%. So it's very, very cheap. So that overall picture, to summarise as we look through from where we stand, is that there's a hopeful economies are not quite so bad. Therefore, we may not borrow as much as we previously thought, but even so, it's quite cheap to borrow. So for once, we have some better news. Thank you.